after Ellen Foster was published, I started writing another book, and I didn't think about my reputation as a novelist. I didn't think about those external forces of writing until someone said something to me about it. And I got very, very nervous, and I called my publisher, Louis Rubin, and I said, these people are saying that I represent a new breed, and they want to know what I'm going to do next. And he said, hush. He proceeded to spend 10 or 15 minutes deflating me. And after that, I don't worry about it at all. I find that when I think about those external things milling around in my life, it interferes with my work, just me and the typewriter. And I was influenced tremendously by Eudora Welty and James Joyce and Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner. And I think that there's a remarkable affinity between literature written in English coming out of Ireland during that period and Southern literature. I think it has something to do with being a defeated province and having the issue of memory and of being an outsider, which I see are the two themes of Southern writing. So I'm very proud to be in the new pack that's coming. I think that love of talk, growing up where I did in Nash County, we never had time for hobbies. You couldn't chop cotton and ski at the same time. You couldn't chop cotton and windsurf at the same time. But you could chop cotton and talk all day and all night. So we grew up talking. And recently I found 325 interviews done in 1937 by the Federal Writers Project as part of the WPA. And the first one I opened up, the interviewer says to the woman on her porch, "Can you just please tell me about your life?" And she says this very timidly. And the woman rears back and she says, "Talk? Heck, talking's my life." And for so many Southerners, particularly women, talking is our life. If you give me a chance, I will dominate the next 20 minutes or so because of love of talk and hearing, just loving to hear talk. So that's one of the reasons I think that Alan's book and Lee's books and my books are told from the first person. And we have our feet, one foot in the past and one foot in the present, coming out of a rural tradition into a more urban and cosmopolitan college environment where we learn how to eat quiche on Saturday and chitlins on Sunday. So we can do both. We can shuttle back and forth between those worlds. Southern writing is just in a dynamic state of change right now. And anytime we're on a cusp, it's thrilling. We've not stagnated any. I love leads. I love journalism. I love to read magazines and newspapers. And I will read tabloid newspapers just for the leads in them. Like when Reagan was at one of his conferences, the nuclear arms talks, I believe, up in Iceland, that day in the Weekly World News, the headline was "Trick Cigar Blows Man's Head Off." And I was absolutely thrilled, absolutely thrilled. So I like the unusual and the gothic and the macabre. Personally, after the first line, I was frightened by it. I was absolutely terrified in almost out-of-the-body way. And I felt that my role writing the book was like following a big cow and just whipping it back in and saying, "Stay with me now, stay in the path." And I gave Louis Rubin, my Southern literature teacher, 30 pages of the book to read. And he was thrilled. He ran up and down the halls at UNC singing, I believe, and that's an unusual thing for this man to do. And then he sent it to Eudora Welty, who was very kind. And after that, I didn't care really what reviewers said about it. It didn't mean anything, because I started A Virtuous Woman right after I finished Ellen Foster, because people told me I was a writer. I'd never wanted to be a writer. I wanted to teach literature and look after my children. And I said, well, I'm a writer, ergo, I'll write. And I sat down and wrote about 20 or 30 of the most hideous pages I'd ever come up with, because I had nothing to write about. Nothing moved me. I just did it because I thought, this is my job. And I waited about 9 months, and I thought of a character first, Jack Stokes. And I liked the way he sounded, and I wanted to know him and investigate him. So I wrote about him. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this. I was confronted last week when I spoke about the burden of memory that I write under as a white Southern 30-year-old, well, almost 30, 29-year-old woman writing in Raleigh, North Carolina. What do I do with this race question? And I told the man who asked me why I felt like I had a monopoly on the burden of memory that it was very personal for me, and that I had to make some personal memories jive. Number one, the vision of my mother taking Annabelle chicken stew in a chipped plate onto the back porch to eat after Annabelle had worked all day. And then later that night, my mother confessing and using Annabelle as her sister confidant. How do I make these images jive? And I have to figure out, was my mother a bigot? Was she a good woman? So I'm writing to figure those things out. And I think that Welty and O'Connor were writing in their tradition the way they knew. And it's beautiful. And I think it is a movement towards confrontation. And after Selma and Greensboro and the March on Washington in 1964, I can't help but be confrontational with it. It would be, as we say in the South, real ugly of me to pussyfoot around the issue. It would be. It would be, and it would be a throwback, and I'm not going to do it. Yeah, I think so. I think the title came after I had written the book, and the Bible verse came after I had written it. Louis Rubin called me up and asked me, "Have you got a Bible?" And I scrambled, and I found one, and I looked. And there, lo and behold, was this Bible verse that was like a concordance to the novel. And it was a virtuous woman. And you have to say, how can she be a virtuous woman? She smokes herself to death. So it was a way of figuring out, and I still don't know. From the last chapter of Proverbs. And I think that although I didn't remember that verse on a conscious level, it's the verse that you hear every time you go to a Southern farm wife's funeral. And I went to a gracious plenty of those when I was growing up. And I think that it stuck and it worked its way around, and it came out as A Virtuous Woman, the novel. I haven't investigated the mind of a Northern woman. I do that by writing. Maybe in a book, sometimes I'll pretend I'm a Northern woman. But I think in the South, speaking from my own point of view, I'm the first one to charge primetime television with sexual bigotry. But if my husband doesn't open my car door when I've got on heels, then I'm the first one to call his attention to it. So in a very, that may sound like I'm demeaning the question or the conversation, but I think those examples illuminate how we want both. Helen Gurley Brown said a few years ago that we could have it all. And I know I'm wearing myself out trying right now to have it all, to have a career and have a degree of integrity in that, and not lose that integrity by showing up in Cuddy Sark liquor ads, to go home and fix nice baked macaroni and cheese for my daughters. And I think that I found a way, and it's just to keep everything as simple as I can, and to keep what Reynolds Price calls snakes away from me. When I do decide to travel and go, I have a 3 or 4 day limit, and I am away from home out of 365 days a year, 8 or 9 days. And when I am at home, I have all 3 children all day. I don't write during the day. I write after they go down at night. So after dinner, I just start drinking coffee, and then I start writing. So when I do go back home, I don't spirit them away so that I can have that alone time. And my publisher is very gracious and he knows that it will take me a long time and that I have to be slow. But I figure that I can write books and I can write articles and book reviews 16 years from now. But in 16 years, my daughters will be out in the car. I hope I know where they will be with credit cards, and I'll be wondering where they are. So I had rather enjoy them now. So that's so destructive to me. If I make myself sit down and write and I just have to grunt through it, then it's horrible. And I feel bad about it, and it doesn't let up. And I get up and I leave it alone. So as strange as this may sound, I just write when the mood hits me. And when I feel a little creative burst, then I can go in and knock off 10 or so pages. But if I go in there and I just feel like I'm going to have to bribe a muse to come in and sit with me and help me, then I get up and I fold laundry or watch TV. I think writer's block is actually a procrastination term, and I think that writer's block is actually something in your mind that you should get rid of. Like when I need to pay the bills, that doubles as writer's block. So if you go and pay the bills, then it frees your mind up. I read an interesting article yesterday, Mickey Spillane, an interview, and he said nothing unclogs writer's block for him like a nice fat advance. I have to admire that. And he said, when I need to write, when I need money, I write. It's as simple as that. That's not my theory, but that's his. My husband, well, he's not a Southern man. He's a, you know what, from New York. He's enlightened, but he also lived in California. That's where he found enlightenment, in San Francisco. I find I spend a great deal of my time explaining the South to him. Being the Southern belle that I am, I also know how to handle the male ego. That was something in my training and my rearing. I don't run into too many problems with it. We learn it at our mama's knee. So, but in all seriousness, there's a tremendous amount of give and take in our home, and my home is so important to me. And I think the most tragic thing that could happen to me, and you're talking to someone, I've lost many things in my life, would be for that to disintegrate. And so I am in charge, and he is in charge of making sure that doesn't happen. And if that did happen over 2 books and over this, then that would just be the silliest and the most wasteful thing. And we work on it every day. And I make sure I go to his conventions, and I make sure from my end of it that I honor what he's doing also. He's a tremendously talented landscape architect and an artist. And he made it possible for me to write Ellen Foster. He earned the money. And since then, I just, every time, if my head starts to get so big that it won't fit under the oven hood, I have to remember who made it possible for that to happen.